Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the different things going on yesterday with the crazy upset that South Florida was able to pull off against Boise State, and then a couple of final thoughts about those Week 1 games that are going to be downright incredible. But let's take a little bit of a step back here. Let's get into my hot takes for the 2025 season. I have 6 of them here. Some I feel very confident in, some I don't feel super confident in, but I do think are very fun and absolutely could happen in the 2025 season that is going to unfold. We'll start with one that I feel relatively confident in. There will be a 9-3 team in the CFP this year. I've kind of battled this one back and forth pretty much all off season. Part of me was saying, a 9-3 team is never going to be able to get above all of the teams that they need to make their way to the CFP. As I look around the sport this year, I don't find a dominant team. I don't find, a real dominant tier one in a lot of these conferences, and particularly the conference that I'm going to talk about here, because I think people, when they talk about 9-3 teams making the CFP, particularly in this year, they talk about Florida and Oklahoma. Those are the two teams that really stand out. They have incredibly, incredibly tough schedules where you can probably take 3 losses and still be firmly in the mix. They have plenty of ability to get a big-time win over a Texas for both these teams. For Florida, getting a big win over Georgia. For Oklahoma, over Alabama. They have those openings to possibly make those big-time wins, have those 3 losses not be as egregious as some others people 3 losses, and make a run at the CFP. Now, I think we can all agree that it's probably not going to be a team from the ACC or the Big 12 unless it's a 9-3 regular season and then you win one in the conference championship like Clemson did last year. I don't expect that to be the case in either of those conferences, and that would be 10-3 anyway. So I do think it's going to be SEC or Big 10. In the Big 10, I think it could be Oregon, a team that, plays really good football. Maybe they lose to Washington in the final week, but Washington is a 10-2 team and firmly in the mix. Then you have a conversation to be had. So it's going to make some people mad. I can almost promise you that. This is not something that I think a lot of people want to see, and particularly the conference that the team is probably going to come from, the SEC, is not the conference you want to see it come from. But I do think this is going to happen this year. I just don't see a team finding their way through any schedule really this year without a couple of lumps, and I think it's going to open the door for some of those 9-3 teams to possibly crash the party in the 12-team playoff this year. Probably the most niche one on this list is the Texas defense will top 60 sacks in this season. It's a very fun one. It's also a very lofty one. There's no doubt about that. No one in the CFP era has gotten to 60 sacks in a season. Only a handful have gotten over 55. I believe Boise State had 57 a year ago, so they got relatively close, but I think this Texas pass rush is just a little bit different. I think Colin Simmons is probably what will decide this. If he can top 15 sacks this year, there's no question that this team has the ability to make this happen, and frankly, he can do that in relatively limited time comparative to what he will do this year. He had 9.5. He is going to be a force off the edge. Then you have Ethan Burke hoping to get a little bit of bounce back season after only having 2 sacks a year ago. Anthony Hill coming off a year where he had 8.5 sacks. Trey Moore coming off a year where he had 6. Brad Spence had 5.5 last year and is going to be more in an edge rushing role this year. And then Colton Vasek, Zeno Omiazulu, all of these different guys that are going to factor in. And then they love to bring the nickel corner. They love to bring guys like Jalen Gilbo or a guy like Jelani McDonald off the edge that are going to have impacts in this game. Now, to get to 60, they have to average about 3.75 over 16 games. They played 16 a year ago, so not crazy to think they could play 16 this year. They are capable of doing that. They're going to need a big game this Saturday. There's no doubt about that. If they get 3 this Saturday, I feel pretty confident because then they can maybe stack up some points against a Sam Houston or a UTEP and then move forward from there. But I think this defense is just a little bit different. I think even against SEC talent, even against some of the best offensive lines in the country, some of the best offensive tackles in the country, I think this group is going to be different. I think they have so much versatility on what they can throw at teams when it comes from pass rushing perspective, and I think they have the best pass rusher in the entire country. And Colin Simmons, I think they top 60 sacks and go down as one of the best defenses we've seen in recent memory. No team in the Power 4 will go winless in conference play. If I just said winless, that's not very fun. There's plenty of teams that will do that this year, but the vast majority of years, we've had this happen, whether it was Purdue up in the Big 10 or Vanderbilt down in the SEC, or last year was Oklahoma State in the Big 12, as crazy as that sounds. This year's going to be too all over the place, in my opinion, for anyone to really have just no wins in their conference. Mississippi State is probably the popular pick, quote unquote, in the SEC. I think that's a better team than people are giving him credit for. I think Blake Shapen is a better quarterback than some people think. I think Fluff Bothwell is going to be a huge addition to that team. I think they did a great job in the portal. Not necessarily getting elite players or game-breaking players, but getting people that fit what Jeff Lebby likes to do. He's too good of a play caller to not sneak up on a couple of teams from time to time. I think they will get at least one win. And then Kentucky is another one. Mark Stoops is just too good to not get one ridiculous win every year. I feel like it happens every single year. Happened with Ole Miss a year ago. I think it'll happen this year. I don't know who it's going to be. Mark Stoops will end up getting someone. I can almost promise you that. For the Big Ten, it'd be likely Purdue. I think Barry Odom's too good. I think he's going to have this defense playing at a very high level. I think he's going to get this team in a position where they probably don't get a massive win over an Ohio State or an Oregon or a Penn State. They probably do get a win over one of the lesser teams in this conference. I think they're going to be a not great defensive team, but at least a good enough defensive team to compete with a Maryland, a Rutgers, one of the teams that is a little bit more in their wheelhouse at the very least. But we'll see what happens there. Definitely a team that I'm a little bit wary on, but I'm going to give them one win in the Big Ten at the very least. In the ACC, Stanford would be the pick. I'm going to promise you one Micah Ford masterclass. That running back is a very, very physical, very intense runner, and he is a guy that can outright take over a game. I'm going to bet you he does that at least one time throughout the ACC, and I don't think I have to sell the Big 12. There are definitely some teams I'm a little bit more worried about than others. UCF may be one of them. Oklahoma State may be again one of them, but at the end of the day, it's going to be insane. I'm going to give everyone at least one win in their conference play. This one's going to be tough. Overall, I think there's a couple of teams here that make me a little bit wary of this prediction, but at the end of the day, I think we're going to have a crazy season. I think it's going to be as competitively balanced that we have ever seen, and I think every team's going to find a way to get a win in their conference. There will be two 5,000-yard passers in college football for the first time since 2019. This is probably the one that's the most adventurous, if you will. This is one that I feel relatively confident in, but I do think there is an opening for this to be just dead wrong in a number of different ways. But the big time question is, who can pull this off? Garrett Nussmeier and Cade Klubnik are the ones that kind of jump off the page. Now, it should be said that Cade Klubnik was about 1,400 yards off this. Garrett Nussmeier was about 1,000 yards off this a year ago. So they would need a big leap. There's no doubt about that. Both those run games I expect to struggle. I expect to not be very, very huge helps to the quarterback, and I expect the wide receiver rooms to be perfect fits for those offenses. I think both these guys have full understanding of their offenses, and I think the offensive lines will be really good at pass protection and maybe not quite as good in run blocking. I think these two players have the ability to do this. It's definitely going to be a little bit tough, especially for Garrett Nussmeier in the SEC, but I think Cade Klubnik could put on a show and absolutely go for over 5,000 yards. It's a tall order. I'm not arguing that, but I do think there's an opening here, especially with the extra CFP games that I expect those two guys to play. Another guy to watch is a guy like Josh Hoover. Went for 3,900 yards a year ago. The TCU offense, I fully expect to get a ton better, and I fully expect the wide receiver group to be a lot more talented, and this guy could definitely get it going under Sonny Dykes. Arch Manning could make this happen. He could put together a great season. I expect him to go for over 4,000 yards. Absolutely. Could go for 5,000 yards if everything just clicks. Same thing for DJ Lagway down there at Florida. And then a couple of guys at the Group of 5 level. Maverick McIver over there at Western Kentucky. Incredibly talented passer that came up from the FCS level that absolutely can do this. And then Caden Veltkamp down at FAU. Another guy that I would watch very, very closely this upcoming season. This one's going to be a tall order. I can almost promise you that. I think it would not be surprising at all if this one did not come to fruition, but I think there's enough guys out there, and I think there's enough defenses that are vulnerable in those conferences to open the door, at the very least, for maybe a Cade Klubnik, Caden Veltkamp type mix to find a way to get to 5,000 yards this upcoming year. The Heisman ceremony will have 3 positions represented. This happened last year. It doesn't happen all that often. It does not happen, at least in the past 20 or 25 years. It's been a whole lot of quarterbacks, and then you would have maybe a D.D. Westbrook thrown in there, or you would have a Christian McCaffrey or a Bryce Love, or one of those running backs from Stanford run that run. But at the end of the day, there are a couple of different options in the way that this could kind of play out. I do think there are a couple of defensive options that could possibly find their way, and that would obviously help me quite a bit. Whether you want to talk about TJ Parker at Clemson or Colin Simmons, Anthony Hill at Texas, Caleb Downs, obviously returning punts. If he returns about 2 or 3 for touchdowns, then we're having a real conversation. Maybe Coy Parrish at Minnesota just totally lights the world on fire. Didn't have a crazy day yesterday, but absolutely could become a bigger and bigger part of that offense and maybe have a huge game and never look back. At the quarterback position, you're probably going to have at least two. I can pretty much promise you that between Arch Manning and Garrett Nussmeier and Cade Klubnik and DJ Lagway and all the big time names around the sport at that position, you're going to have about two of those. I can almost promise you that. For running backs, I think you have Jeremiah Love, Mekhi Hughes, Nate Frazier at Georgia is a really interesting name to watch. A guy that I don't think is getting quite enough love going into the season. If Georgia is the team that I expect them to be, especially on the offensive line and run blocking, he could do all types of special things this year and find his way to New York City. Wide receivers, Jeremiah Smith, Ryan Williams absolutely could do it, among a couple other guys, maybe a Jordan Tyson thrown in there from Arizona State. I just think there's too many good players. I think there's so many guys at so many different positions that can make this happen. Now, you're walking a little bit of a tightrope because you know there's going to be a couple of quarterbacks. You pretty much have to fit a running back in there one way or the other, and then it's a defender or it's a wide receiver. It's going to be a tough thing to happen upon, but I think we have enough talent all over the field this season. I think we have enough new quarterbacks to where maybe the quarterback conversation doesn't overtake the entire Heisman conversation, and maybe we have a defensive player or two that are special enough to find their way to New York City. And then the bye in the CFP will still not be a game changer. And this isn't to say it won't be more helpful and it won't be more even in the CFP this upcoming year. I do think it will be. With the straight seeding, I think it makes more sense. I think it's better for the sport. I also am picking LSU to beat the bye team in Bama that won the SEC. I'm picking Texas to top the Penn State team that I think is going to get the bye from the Big Ten. Georgia, I think, is going to beat the Clemson team that got the bye. Ohio State, I believe, was the only team that I had getting a bye and winning that first game in the CFP. I just think it's not going to be a huge difference maker. I really do think that a lot of these teams, they're so variable, they're so different, even at the very end of the season, that you're going to have a couple of teams that just start a little bit slower because they haven't played in 21 days at that point, and the other team had played 14 days before that. It is going to be a really, really interesting thing. It's absolutely something I'm fully in favor of, and I think benefits the 12-team playoff, does the straight seeding. But I don't think it's going to make a huge difference in terms of who wins those bye games. Whether or not that's because the teams that got the byes were better or worse than the other teams, I don't know. I don't know what that looks like, or if it's an indictment of the 12-team format and they immediately push to 16. Whatever that looks like, I don't really know. What I can tell you is I just don't fully believe that college football teams going off for 21 days, unless there's a absolutely catastrophic injury that they need a couple of weeks to come back from, I don't think that really benefits that team too much, and I think the teams that have, a 10-day break is plenty to get a college football team ready and at least have some of those early mistakes not be as big of a factor for the non-bye teams than the bye teams. So I'm going to go with the college football playoff to just those byes just not to mean quite as much as some people might think they will right now. We'll obviously find that out towards the end of the season, but that's one that I feel relatively confident in right about now. But those are my hot takes as we head into this season. I think a couple of them are a little bit out there. A couple of them are a little bit aggressive. When you talk about two 5,000-yard passers, it's going to have to be a couple of pretty incredible offenses. The last time it happened, obviously, was the Joe Burrow year where he went over for 5,000, and I'm forgetting the other. It was the Washington State quarterback, and now I'm blanking on his name. Apologies there, but he went for an incredible season that year. It's going to have to be something like that. A little bit all over the place, a little bit weird, one group of five guy, one big name. We'll see who can pull it off. Maybe it is Garrett Nussmeier, and LSU just helped me out twice in a row, but we'll see what happens there. Obviously something that we will talk about throughout the season, and we'll update you on how right or wrong I was about those at the end of the year. But let's get into the best bets I have for this upcoming weekend. I got 8 of them that I find really, really interesting for this upcoming weekend. One that I think I'm getting a little bit of pushback on as the game gets closer tonight, but we'll talk about it all right after this, so stick with us.